Hello and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. In this particular episode, I'd like to talk a little more, actually make a subsequent video about the Hague Convention adoptions. We can call this Hague Convention Part 2. I already have introductory video to it, but I thought I'd get into a little more detail here because there are so many procedures and so many things that need to be done that, if you have a better idea of the complexities of it and the agencies that you need to work with, it will make it, number one, so maybe it's less daunting, but number two, so you get the right people and agencies to do what you need to do. Okay? Now, and let me first explain what has occurred. Now, before 2008, if you were going to adopt a child, basically you had to meet the requirements for adoption and 2 years, residency requirement and legal custody and all of that. But the United States became a party to what's called the Hague Convention, which there are many countries around the world. There's probably around 75 around the world that are parties to the Hague Convention. And, you've probably heard the Hague Convention. What does it mean? What doesn't mean? The bottom line is the Hague Convention is a treaty between nations that, number one, protects the child, okay? The child that's going to be adopted. It has all kinds of safeguards in place, so there's no, illegal baby smuggling, that there's no trafficking of babies, that there's, that everything is in the best interest of the child. But then again, it also protects the adoptee parents. It also protects the biological parents. It's got everything in mind. Now, with again the welfare of the child being the most important. Now, the issue with the Hague Convention is that because it has so many requirements and the procedures are so strict, it tends to take a bit longer than the normal adoption petition used to take. However, in exchange for that, hopefully, the parents, the adoptive parents, the child, will all lead better lives and will all have a better chance to make everything go through. And if you have to wait a little longer for that, for the procedures to go through, then that's what needs to be done. So let me just briefly tell you what the Hague Convention. First, what you're supposed to do. First, and let me just preface this by saying, you're free to call my office, make an appointment for a consultation. The issue is that I'm giving you information on what can be done and the procedures, but ultimately you want to make sure that the immigration attorney you have knows how to direct you through the maze of procedures that are necessary for a Hague Convention adoption and petition ultimately to go through. So the first thing is you need to see if where the child is a Hague Convention country, and that they've signed on to the treaty. There are different countries that are actually Hague Convention countries, but in fact they do not have, they haven't signed on to the treaty, so therefore they're technically not a Hague country, and you wouldn't fall under the Hague Convention, because if you want to adopt a child that's not in a Hague country, then of course the Hague Convention doesn't apply to you. Okay, that's the bottom line. But the vast majority of countries that generally the U.S. wants to adopt from, generally speaking, they will come from a Hague country. So first, just make sure that number one, it comes from a Hague country, and that the Hague country is a party and has signed on to the treaty. Okay. Next, you need to look at who the Hague requires that there be a central authority in each country. Okay, that is basically responsible for implementing the provisions of the Hague Treaty. So in the United States, it's the Department of State, and there's different names for every single country that that's a party to the Hague Treaty. So you need to find out what the central authority is in the country of which you want to adopt the child. You need, and of course, again, the Department of State is in the U.S. You have to find out this information, because as the time goes on, there will be intercommunication between all of these agencies in a procedure that's mandated by the Hague Convention. Now, next, you have to select your adoption service provider. Now, that's just not anybody. Okay, you can't just go into the yellow pages and it says best adoption agency on the planet. Call us. It doesn't work like that. When you're under the Hague Convention, you must get an adoption service provider that, number one, is certified, but number two, is recognized by the designated agency in the foreign country. So let's say that you're adopting from the Philippines, which is a party to the Hague Convention. You look at their central authority, you look at whom they recognize as an adoption service provider in the United States, specifically in the state where you are, and then you call one of them. Okay, now this is a big thing. You need to call and or sit down with the various certified adoption service providers, and you need to get all kinds of information from them in order to determine who you want to go with, because this is an important factor. It's not just somebody, for example, that recommends it. As an attorney, I can give you a list of the agencies which fall under this particular category, but the bottom line is you have to call them. You have to get a list of their requirements as to what they will do. You have to get a list as to all of their costs, and it can be expensive. I've had some clients come back, and it's in the tens of thousands of dollars that they have to pay these agencies in order to help do everything they need to do under the Hague Convention. But in any event, that would be the next thing you would have to do. Now, the next option, or the next requirement, is you have to get a home study. With a Hague Convention, before you can go on, and one other thing, don't adopt the child, not yet. Okay, when you start this process, don't think you can adopt the child, then go to an immigration attorney and say, okay, we've adopted a child, now what do we do? Because in order to fall under the Hague Convention, everything has to be followed step by step. If you adopt the child before you get approval from the United States to adopt the child, it will be out of order, and you will have to actually vacate that adoption in order that you can adopt again at the proper time. And that's going to waste all kinds of time and money. So what you want to do first is then you get the home health care agency, which generally the adoption service provider will be able to provide you with. This process does take several months. They do a background check on both you and your spouse. They make sure there's no criminal history. They make sure there's no drug use. They make sure there's sufficient financial responsibility. You also want to make sure that your requirements meet the foreign entities, in the other country. They also want to make sure that you meet certain criteria in order to be adoptee parents. And if you don't, theoretically, you could be approved by the United States, but not approved by the foreign country. So you need to make sure all of this is in place. But the home study, of course, will take some time. There will be a nice big report that will be able to be prepared, and then what will happen is they will then send that, if my office is doing it, they then send it to my office, and now we have that as an exhibit. Now, what we would then do is we file what's called the 800A petition. What this is this is getting approval from the immigration to adopt. And in that particular case, we need to show all the necessary evidence. Number one, the home study was done, that that it's a proper Hague country, that the child can be adopted. Okay, we need to provide various proof with that. Now, once the this is submitted to immigration, and let's just say it's approved, then we are able to then move on to the next step, and that's where essentially you are matched with a child, or obviously if you already know the child, you can proceed forward at that time with one of two things. You can either proceed forward with the adoption, in which case that obviously takes time, and you have to do the adoption in the foreign country. Keep in mind, with a Hague country adoption, you do not have to have a 2-year foreign residency requirement like you do in non-Hague countries, or before the United States became a Hague country. So you don't have to go live in the foreign country for 2 years unless the foreign country has some residency requirements, which different countries do. But at this point, you go forward with the adoption or obtaining legal custody of the child, because when you're coming in on a Hague Convention, you can either bring the child in fully adopted, at which point, in reality, when the child comes to the U.S., he or she, if under 18, will automatically be a U.S. citizen, or you have legal custody of the child, such as guardianship. You bring the child into the United States, and then you do the full adoption inside the United States, at which point, again, if the child's under 18, then the child can become a citizen at that point. Now, once you have either legal custody or you have guardianship, then at that point, you can now begin on the process of applying for a visa for the child to move to the United States. And I am leaving a lot of stuff out as far as what documentation is needed in order to show that you're ready to move on to each step. I mean, there's different documents that show that the child's ready, that the parents are qualified and all that, but I'm just giving you a nice roadmap of what to expect. Now, the visa application, once that's done, you submit all that, and then ultimately the child will be going, for the interview. And of course, they don't interview the child, because the child generally is a baby. But at that point, the officer will determine if everything's been met with the Hague Convention, if all the, everything's lined up. If the child is admissible, okay, there's some cases, heart-wrenchingly, but the child is inadmissible because of medical conditions and so forth. So you want to make sure you take care of all that before. Make sure your attorney looks at the facts and determines if the child would be inadmissible in the first place. Okay, and then assuming that the child is not inadmissible, everything's been done, and you've filed the 800A, and then secondly, after the adoption or legal guardianship, you filed the I-800 and all the packets that go with that, then and the visa petition, then if approved, you will be able to go pick up the child basically in a foreign country, come to the U.S., and voila, everything is done and you're all happy, okay? This process does take usually a minimum of 1 year, sometimes longer depending, but it again is all in the protection of the child and everyone. And if it were really easy to get, you can imagine how, which is why they came up with the treaty in the first place. You can imagine, unfortunately, what happens with the baby smuggling and baby selling and all of that. So at any rate, that is a more or less a procedure or a map of, in a little more detail, of the Hague Convention, what's required. Go ahead and like my video, subscribe, and then go ahead and email me, and or go online or call my office for a consultation. I'll be happy to let you know. Of course, I can do Hague Convention petitions all over the U.S., so it's not a problem. And then we'll go from there. Okay, thanks. More in the coming videos.